Hello friends, I plan to show you a typical carbon footprint calculator which is available online. Before that, let me just revise some concepts which we have already learned, especially regarding how the calculator interfaces with the user. Uh, as I said, what the calculator would do is it would calculate the carbon footprint for an individual, and the input is the information about the lifestyle related to energy consumption. And finally, what would be the output from the calculator is it would calculate the carbon footprint based on the answers which the user would give, the values which the user would enter into the carbon footprint calculator. So what are the questions which the calculators would ask? And I would be showing you the typical calculator where these questions are asked. It would typically ask where the location is and the number of family members staying with you. Why it is done is because uh, emission factor has to be taken for that location. Because the emission factor would depend on the electricity, and the electricity would depend on from where the electricity is coming, that is whether it is hydroelectricity, whether it is 100% coal, whether it is from renewables and so on, right? And the energy consumption which the user is incurring, right? For calculation of carbon footprint from transport, for the individual, it is important for the individual to enter the correct values of how many kilometers the individual is traveling and what is the mode of his or her transport, whether the transport is by uh, bikes, motorbike, or by using a public transport facility like train or bus or taxi, or whether he or she owns a car, right? And whether he or she is traveling for leisure or for workplace and so on, right? So this kind of questions are to be asked. Based on the questions and based on the answers which the user would give into the calculator would then calculate the carbon footprint. So let me show you how it is done for a typical calculator which is available online. So this is one of the calculator which is available online, wherein it helps you to calculate the carbon footprint for an individual. So look at this, what it is asking. It is asking for the what it is saying initially is welcome to the web's leading carbon footprint calculator, and it is asking for the location. For example, you can put the place where you are staying and India, for example. And in India also, if you are staying in Maharashtra, then the calculations would be different, right? Uh, then for a period for which the calculations is done is to be entered here, because if it is the annual carbon footprint calculations, then you will have to enter an entire 12 months period for that. Then comes the actual questions. As I said, explained you earlier, most important information is to be given is how much is the electricity consumption, and electricity consumption is typically in kilowatt hour, right? And what you see here is some value of emission factor. So what is this 0.8274? 0.8274 is the electricity conversion factor or emission factor suggested for the country you have selected, but you can replace it with your own. So the calculator has a provision to enter manually also the emission factor for that location, right? Same thing about LPG, how much one is consuming for LPG in terms of either therms or in kilowatt hour. For heating oil, how many liters of heating oil one is consuming, how many tons, how many US tons, or you can also express it in kilowatt hour. Same thing about LPG, how many cylinders also could be one of the ways of asking the data, right? So again, these features are inbuilt in the calculator. We can go for a detailed calculation by putting in as many questions as possible. So this would be the consumption for a household. When the people from the households are traveling by air, flight carbon footprint can be calculated by using the typical emission factor for flight. Okay, and whether one is traveling by economy class or business class, one can get the correct carbon footprint from that, right? Other way of using or other way of looking at this flight data is what is called as radioactive forcing. This is generally an additional carbon footprint which is generated by aircrafts, and for that one might choose to ignore this also, or one might put a multiplying factor of 1.891, which is the recommended factor by a regulatory agency, right? Same thing as I explained you earlier. Look at the data which the calculator is asking for car travel. It is asking either the type of the car which one is traveling, whether it is a big car or a small car, or it is asking you whether you know the mileage of your vehicle. Okay, so both the datas can be used for arriving at the carbon footprint calculations. Okay, if the user is providing the data on mileage, then directly one can multiply the emission factor and get the carbon footprint. If it is providing for the type of the car, then depending upon the cc of the car, one can take the value of a typical emission factor for that capacity of the car. Same thing applies for your bike, right? For bus and rail, it is typically the calculator would ask for the kilometers traveled, and then for that location there are typical emission factors depending upon how many people are traveling in that bus, divided. So as I had explained you earlier in my course, what is important for you to know how much is the emission per person per kilometer. So if that data is available for a bus, for a car, for a taxi or for any other public transport, the calculator would use that data and arrive at the carbon footprint of the individual. So this way, the carbon footprint typically would generate the result, and this would be the output of the carbon footprint calculator. So this is one way of one such carbon footprint calculator which is available online. Okay, I had tried to explain you the logic behind how a carbon footprint calculator is designed, or how you can also design your own carbon footprint calculator in any of the coding language one might choose. Thank you very much.